I'm Meher. Across borders, languages, and time, memories travel, half remembered, half imagined, carrying the weight of the people who came before us. And in the hands of storytellers, these memories transform into narratives that challenge the present, redeem the past, and turn personal histories into universal truths. Today, between somewhere and everywhere, we explore this alchemy, where inherited memory becomes art and identity becomes possibility. Please join me in welcoming two extraordinary voices that master this craft with depth and fearless imagination. Our first speaker today is a poet, a novelist, a librettist, and musician whose work moves between cities, genres, and art forms with effortless brilliance. From the Booker shortlisted Narcopolis, which won the DSC Prize, to award-winning poetry and operatic collaborations, and his new novel, The Elsewherians, he is a rare voice of invention and rhythm that continues to reshape the boundaries of storytelling. He is restless, inventive, and unforgettable. He is Jeet Thayil. Joining him on stage, our next speaker moves between poetry, novels, hip-hop, and woodcut art with fierce grace, turning memory, identity, and migration into stories that blaze off the page. Long-listed for both the International Dublin Literary Award and the Miles Franklin Award, his work reminds us that language can be rhythm, resistance, and refuge. Please welcome to the stage, Omar Musa. Today's chair is an author and former humanitarian development specialist whose debut novel, Shurjo's Clan, was shortlisted for Best First Book at Literature Live, the Mumbai Lit Fest in 2023. Her writing spans essays, true life narratives, and fiction, and she brings a rare blend of global insight and literary sensitivity to our discussion. Please welcome Iffat Nawaz. Right, we heard a couple of ringtones go off, so I think it would be appropriate now. Do please take a minute. I think this is a good time. Reach into your bags, pockets, phones, take them out. Just double check and make sure that you are giving the silent treatment to your phones for the next hour. Thank you so much. And thanks to our ISL interpreters, Tejal and Shabina from Access for All, for making our sessions inclusive. Over to you, Iffat and gentlemen. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Meher. It's so good to be here and a full house. Lucky you've gotten, lucky we are here. I'm just going to give a little intro. Many of you might have heard of Elsewherian. Fierce Land just came to India, so it's hot off the press. These stories that we have today, before there were books, there were stories, not written down. And stories change through generations, we know this. Storytellers too. And what they want to say and how they want to craft the language also changes. What our grandparents, parents, the stories that they were writing or they were sharing with us were perhaps more idealistic. There were 2, 3, 4, 5 wars they had gone through. They wanted to build different nations, different societies that were free of those wars, but there were also scars that they were carrying. The literature that came at that time where, Kurt Vonnegut's Slaughterhouse-Five or 1984 or Catch-22. There were a certain kind of stories. Our parents who came after, they built a different world. They curated it for us who were more post-war children. They wanted to give us a rather perfect life and in different manners. They built and they destroyed. But in those buildings and destruction, there were also lots of secrets that all of our families kept. They didn't want to expose us to the gore. They didn't want to expose us to the hardship that they were going through. But the problem with secrets are they always have a way of catching up, And they're always invisibly there, very much, subtly there. The inheritance that we have, that we carry, that are not touchable, but they're palpable. And both of these fantastic, amazing authors here have crafted stories that are perhaps the voices that represent the voice of our generation, those who grew up in the 70s, 80s, 90s, who had inherited these things that were not property or things we could hold, but they were memories, and they were secondhand trauma, and they were conditioning, and they were there was beauty in it, there was victory in it, but there was also a lot of definition and herohood that were passed down to us. There was a lot of weight of inheritance. And Jeet and Omar, from very different perspective, yet with such similar themes, have created a new language and a new approach to this. Both of their stories come from a non-linear narrative, and there's a surrealism to both. There's magic, there is mystery, there is loyalty to family and guilt and betrayal. There are secrets, of course, like I was saying. And in all of that, there is also this grief and loss and investigative confessional elements that question, what do we do with this? Not everything can come full circle. We want it to. The past is not often left in the past. They come to the present, and I think both of them have ghosts in their stories and myths and curses that do come back to haunt, and then it makes you question time itself. Do we ever leave anything behind? I will not speak more because I think you must experience the languages they have created so uniquely from their own voices. So, Jeet, may I ask you to read from Elsewherian?
Sure. I'm going to read a passage that was going to be the original ending of the book, but then facts overtook it, and I had to add 2 more pages because this character died in real life, and so I added a couple of pages. But this was the original ending. And it's about a character called Ammu, who is the kind of connecting thread through the book. Now it seems to Ammu she has no home, for home is no longer a city or a country and the people in them, but the rooms of the houses in which she's lived. The big bedroom she shared with her sisters at Anithotum, the teacher's quarters, 2 cots to a room in Alway, the small front room in Mahim that served as both living and dining room, the city outside, just steps away from the floor she shared with her new husband, the balcony that ran the length of the apartment by the Arabian Sea on Cadell Road, the front room of the apartment at Patliputra housing colony that became a meeting place for students. She'd taken care of the children there while George was in jail. The small living room of the apartment in Shirin building near Navy Nagar in Kolaba. The bedroom of their first apartment in Hong Kong at Arts Mansion. The kitchen of the second on McDonald Road, where she thought of tearing into 100 pieces the picture of the Vietnamese woman. The view from the apartment in New York, 12 floors up, of the canyons of 79th and York, sirens at any hour of the night. The large front room of the first apartment she bought in Bombay, a 6-inch view of the sea, palm trees outside the 4th floor window. The sunken living room of the first house they owned in Bangalore, the sunlit bedroom and garden of the second, the jackfruit tree and the butterfruit. The remembered rooms unfold in her mind like pictures from an album with sheets of tissue between the pages. They bring vivid sensations that leave her grateful and surprised. She traces herself through the rooms of her life, opening seamlessly, one into another, forward and back. So, on a rainy day in Mamlasheri, when she steps indoors from the porch, it is to the cold, muted light of a northern country. It seems correct then that these memories have lost their sting and can no longer cause hurt or happiness. They are only receptacles to return to her the past. Thank you.
And Omar?
Hi everyone, thank you so much for having me. I just caught 5 flights to be here. I got it here only a couple of hours ago. And I feel very privileged to be reading and sharing work in front of all of you. So I'm going to read the opening passage of my new novel, Fierce Land. It's written from the point of view of quite a few different characters, but one of the main characters and voices is the voice of the Bornean rainforest itself. So this opens the book. What's that? What was that? Oh. It was a punctuation to my performance. I am forest. Unstitch my mist, open me inside out, bare my rivers to moon and matahari, mud gravy and gizzard stones, steeple my long luminous bones and carnal green, the unseen scene. Green is God naming itself. Green is the sprawl, rot and fern tickle of time. My steaming velvet a sprung floor for trickster tango, orang, hutan, orangutan, mouse deer, leopard, vampire, ghost, black loam and clay blue-grey, sequined by skulls. I wear my sap-blooded heart on sleeve, slink, snuffle, snout, snot, gabble, growl, fart, wheeze, kiss mangrove mouth, lick tendril tongue, jujitsu rhizome and root, silat smoke, substrate slang in lightning bolts, mushrooms festoon my shadows, bloop, bloop, bloop. Weave birdsong with smoke where the canopy fallows, chant bulbul, kingfisher, hornbill, eaglet, egret, owl, hoot, 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 chant falling fruit, duku, tarap, bambangan, mangosteen, langsat, red durian, chant trillion-fold feet, centipede, chit-chat, crab cadenza, chant inflorescent fires, orchid, begonia, pitcher plant, corpse flower, lily, bunga kantan. Now chant rain, 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 in many names, hujan, darun, uran, dasum, rasam, moris porris, milk from the udder of a drunkard cloud, falling sheet of needles and mercury grenades. Now chant long, fathomless days, langur, langur, langswir, language and all its bastard kids. Now blend my borders with the edge of your thumb, make maps overlap, make drums from my hollows and hallow my sap, loop vine into noose or boo-boo trap, read murder in my burl and bowl, rejoice in my riddles and rank rejuvenation. I give birth to myself, I devour myself, I am eternally starving, so feed me floods, feed me fires, or maybe just a man will do. Oh, feed me the wraiths that are tormenting you. I am forest. I am forest. Face your fears and name where you find me. North Borneo. Spell it out in emeralds and magma. Now name a year. 1998. Polish it like black volcanic glass. Let us dally no more, Sayang. Let us name this thing a ghost story. Yeah, the games begin here.
How fantastic was that? I mean, we're lucky to have 2 poets with their rhythms and beats right here. And one of the things that I noticed while reading both Jeet and Omar are, I mean, they're both poets, performers, as well as novelists. And there's a rhythm to their writing, you know, and when they write the different voices, and both of the books have, I mean, Jeet's it has first person, it goes into third person, it mixes, it plays with you, it challenges you. You go between love and hate and in between and all of that through the kind of voices that he has created. Omar gives Forrest a voice, you know. There are multiple characters. The main characters are Roz and Harun, as a pair of siblings, and as well there are many others. You know, the almost the antagonist has a voice, has a chapter. Other minor, you think minor characters, but once you're done, the voice and the beat in those places are so strong that they have now entered you. So I want to talk about this. I want to ask questions about how you craft this voice and how much of your poetry and rhythm come into it. And is there, an inspiration that works? How much of it is from reality and how much is the rhythm is in your head and your heart?
It takes a lot of experimentation and trial and error, and also maybe a hyperactive mind to come up with these different voices. I knew that I wanted to write a polyglot, polyphonic book because it was about, a lot of it's about memory and the faultiness of memory and truths that live on unstable ground. And so I wanted to have all these different voices of people from North Borneo of different ages who'd grown up in different eras. In the pre-colonial era, when North Borneo was run not by the British Crown itself, but by a British trade company, the North Borneo Trade Company, that made no bones about being there just to exploit the timber and the oil and the minerals. And then characters that grew up in the post-independence era, trying to make a whole lot of cash off timber and palm oil, but also with quite high hopes for the new Malaysia. And then their children. And as you say, are these children who inherit these things and the legacies of their parents, are they kind of doubly lost, especially if they grow up in a diaspora? So these are questions I've asked of myself. You only have to hear my accent to hear that I was born and raised in Australia, not in Malaysia. And so I was like really interested in exploring these. But then as I kept kind of experimenting with these voices, I realized that there was one voice that was missing, and that was the voice of the forest. Because I was responding in many ways to things that had been written about Borneo, or books like Heart of Darkness by Conrad, who also wrote probably the most famous book set in Borneo, novel, Lord Jim. And he's a Polish guy come Britain, and wrote about Borneo, and he often, in something like Heart of Darkness, will use the idea of the wilderness to represent the heart of man and use it as a metaphor, and also it's often an impressionistic blur in the background of the characters, usually the European characters. Whereas I wanted to foreground, obviously, the Bornean and Malay characters, but also I wanted to foreground the forest itself so that it had its own agency, it had its own voice. It wasn't something that was just there to be extracted or exploited or turned into metaphor. It was something to be respected, something that is playful and secretive and performative and ferocious. And so I had to sort of play around a lot to get that voice right.
And what you read just now, there are 51 languages, is it? From words from Sabahan languages? Because I think you were collecting that, right? The different dialects.
Yeah, there's a section in the book where a character called Crazy Auntie, she calls herself that, but any Malaysian out there has got a crazy auntie, and I wanted to honour the crazy aunties of the world. And she is an eccentric poet. In a way, she's kind of the moral heart of the book. And she has this dream to translate a very simple poem called The Song of the Wood into every spoken language of that part of Borneo, which is 50. We have 54 spoken languages there. And so because Crazy Auntie wanted to do this, it meant that I then had to try and do it. But I was very naive, and I'm not a linguist or an academic, and so when I embarked on this, I suddenly was confronted with the horrendous truth, which is that so many of these indigenous languages, probably like here, like everywhere in the world, like Australia, are facing erasure and are disappearing. And so I went out with this naive hope, but I ended up getting probably about 16 or 17 of the languages translated in here, which was actually really good going, to be honest. And I went on all sorts of adventures, which maybe I could talk about later, but yeah,
Sounds good.
it was
Thank
a big
you,
project.
And Jeet, so tell us more about Amu and George, of course, as well as Jeet. And I think you might already know a bit about Elsewherian, but if you don't, it's a documentary novel, which is such a smart thing, because as you read it, you wonder which part is documentary and which is, which is real and which is fiction. And then you're in between. But to even create that sort of a narrative that goes not in like a chronological order, but all over, that's a voice itself. The time is the voice, and the places have voices. So, Jeet.
The book begins with a kind of a epigraph, and it goes, "The real names and photographs in these pages are fictions. The fictional names and events are documentary. The truth, as we know, lies in between." And I call it a documentary novel because there are photographs and actual life stories and mentions of real people, but they're often doing things they never did in real life, including the characters who are my parents. And so I thought the correct thing to do would be to ask their permission. In fact, one of the other epigraphs that begins the book is, "When a writer is born into a family, the family is finished." Because all the secrets that we were talking about end up eventually in a book, whether you like it or not. So I thought it was only right that I should ask my parents their permission and show them a little bit of what I was doing a few years ago while I was working on this book. And interestingly, my father agreed immediately. He loved the idea of being a character in a novel. My mother, not so much. She understood, in a way that he didn't, what kind of books I write. And so she was full of trepidation, as she should have been. Of course, there was never any question that she would withhold her permission. She gave it, but reluctantly. She never saw the complete book, but I did show her pages of it on my laptop, and I think there was a grudging acceptance there. I think in India it's not just crazy aunties, we have crazy moms as well.
And how much of, they are based on your parents, how much of their voice do you think you were channeling through, if we could do some sort of a balance there?
I think certainly the Amu character, that's her voice, very much. I think anyone who knew her in real life would recognize that voice. And also some of the other characters in the book, they're based on family members, but I haven't used their real names because, I didn't want to be open to libel or taken to court, so I used different names. But again, anyone in the extended family reading those, they would know who it is. I don't know about the ethical correctness of this method of writing a novel, but I think, once you've written conventional novels, you have to keep yourself interested as a writer, and I think certainly my father saw the book incomplete, as an object, and spent 3 or 4 days reading it quite carefully, and had nothing disparaging to say. And also, I got the feeling he enjoyed being a character in a novel. And he was absolutely unsurprised by being a character in a novel. It was as if he had always expected this to be the case. And he's just wondering what took so long.
Wonderful. So this is about others. We're talking about characters that both of you might have been inspired by. But what about the truth you carry inside? You know, I think as writers, often when you're writing, things get revealed that you did not know that you were revealing for yourself. And I really don't like the word anymore, healing, but we just come to that anyway. The parts of you do actually let go some of the things we're carrying. Were there anything like that that happened through the process of writing these novels that, you know, sort of you saw something in a different manner, there was a bigger picture or maybe a more honed in understanding of things, and was there an inner compass that led you through it?
I'll just say one quick thing. I think it was Naipaul who said that you can't lie in fiction. You can certainly lie in a non-fiction, however counterintuitive that might seem, because you can keep it very dispassionate and cold, in quotes, and keep yourself out of it. But when you're writing fiction, even the characters that you choose, the historical events that you choose, the incidents that you choose to portray all reflect something about you as a person. And even the language you choose, the way you frame a sentence about a certain event tells the reader things about the writer that you may not even want out there, you know. And I think that's one of the great pleasures of reading fiction.
I think one of the experiences I had while writing this novel is something that every writer confronts, which is imposter syndrome. But I felt that on quite a large scale because I did grow up away from my Tanah Air, my homeland. And so I often had to confront that fear and be paralyzed by that self-doubt. But in the process of writing this book, I did move back there, and I would say that through writing it, I developed a much deeper and more complex and maybe even contradictory relationship with North Borneo, and felt and it made me how do I say this? I guess I had to make a choice at a certain point not to be paralyzed by that imposter syndrome, but to allow it to fuel me, to read deeper, listen harder, write fiercer, have more conversations, learn when to shut up and then when to speak. Because it's very easy, I think, in the diaspora to oftentimes assume this role that you're the font of all wisdom about your homeland, which you're not, of course. And so you have to learn to have these conversations and listen very deeply to communities, to have really good readers. Because there were times when I noticed that I had real blind spots, and one that was confronting was my ear was not as attuned to the colloquialisms and the language of North Borneo in the way that it is, of course, to my hometown, Queanbeyan in Australia. You know, my first book used a lot of slang, a lot of hip-hop language, colloquialism, and my ears are tuned to that. But I wanted to capture that in this book when you talk about voice. And then I realized that it was almost whatever the oral version of a blind spot, a deaf spot, if you could call it. I don't know if that's a word. But I couldn't quite hear it, so it meant that I had to overcome this, my own pride in a way, and then get really good readers and tell them to be as sharp and as critical as they needed to be so that it rang true. And so I guess in some ways I set out to write a love letter to Borneo, but as the book went on, it became equal parts love letter and elegy to the things that we've lost. And then I guess somewhere along the way it was also kind of a call to arms, because there is, I became angrier and angrier as I saw the environmental destruction that had been wrought upon my homeland, and the corruption, and how so much of it had been destroyed. Not just in terms of the environment, you know, when if I can use the metaphor of, you know, the biodiversity of a jungle being replaced with the monocrop of palm oil. Equally, this is happening culturally with the languages and cultures of East Borneo as well. So there was a fair dollop of fury that became part of the process as well.
I wonder if anything called love letter exists anymore. I think when we start, we think it will be so, and then something else might emerge. Going to the diaspora part, both of you, Elsewherians, I think a lot of us here are Elsewherians, can relate to it. All of us here are. This multiplicity, the identity of this, and the plasticity you need to also go between one identity and another, because I don't know if I'm as Bangladeshi, as American, and now in Pondicherry and Pondicherrian, I'm constantly switching. And I think one of the things that the main characters in the book, Harun and Roaz, they're in America and Australia, and as well they're Malay, and one of the things that Omar does is, he has so many Malay words, so you kind of feel the softness of the language, and then some of it is not translated, but like I love the word sayang, for example, now, it's gonna like stay with me forever. So all of that, so we are like kind of like a pickle in a way, right? So we've created all these jars of pickles in a way. And so that part, that identity, and that voice itself, how much of that is sort of meditated on, questioned for yourself? I love these inner process questions, so either of you, and I know you have, the characters have gone from Hong Kong to US to New York, Kerala, of course, beautiful description of the feast in the beginning of Ammu and George's wedding, it's just fascinating. And both of you have this taste and this, the touch and all of that, the sensual elements. But all of that, coming into an identity that is also of nowhere, in a way, that's rootless, yet so rooted. So where are these roots inside?
I'm going to pick up on something Omar mentioned about rage. To do with a kind of colonialism and post-colonialism that we are all subject to, in a way. One of the things that I did in this documentary novel was wreak my own vengeance against Time magazine, of all things. Because my father started a magazine called Asia Week in Hong Kong. And it was, the tagline was, a magazine for Asians, by Asians. Because until then, all you had was a magazine called The Review, which was white men telling Asians about Asia. So their whole idea was a magazine where the editor was Asian, the staff was mainly Asian. So they started a magazine called Asia Week, did really well. Then they made a huge mistake. They sold shares to Reader's Digest because they put in a lot of money into it. And they wanted to expand. They had tiny offices in Wan Chai in Hong Kong at the time. Reader's Digest then sold their shares to Time magazine without telling Mike and my dad, the editors of Asia Week. And Time magazine shut down Asia Week, saying that the magazine was losing money when it was actually selling 130,000 copies a week. And they used all those resources, 15 years of amazing photographs, stories, to prop up Time Asia, which never managed, which failed pretty much from day one. So that whole story is told in Elsewherians, a way of Asia fighting back against, palm oil in a colonial sense. And there's a line in the book that Asia Week was killed not by Time, the usual assassin of men and magazines, but by Time, with a capital T and in italics.
Yes. And you went back and worked there, right?
I did.
20 years later. And
I did.
Yes. So what was that? Just sort of like going back to understand what your father had started, or because that whole time seems like you didn't even want to root yourself in Hong Kong. It was more of a curiosity, a research. Was that rage? What was it?
Now I can say it was research for this book,
Yeah.
but at the time, I had no idea at all, and it was just the job offer came to me, and at the time I was so kind of confused and naive in a way that I just assumed it would be worth doing, and went to Hong Kong, and of course realized it was a mistake right away, because by then time was already running things. And as the son of the founder, I think they might have seen me as a threat. So I didn't last very long. I quit in about 6 months. But I'm so glad I went there, because one of the characters in this book is a Hong Konger from a old Hong Kong Indian Muslim family whose main claim to fame in Asia Week was that he had a copy of the Satanic Verses on his desk to show how secular he was. Except it was the copy that he had on his desk was untouched. It had never been opened. And he kept the spine out so that when you entered the room, you could see, oh, right, Satanic Verses. There's a detail you could never invent, So, yeah, it was research, I guess.
Nice. I love the occultism, the mythical element, the locket, the marina. In yours, Jeet, there are ghosts, and also just the surreal nature of both of your writing. You like hop in between things. Sometimes you don't know if this is an hallucination. Is Roz on drugs and therefore she's seeing things? Even the ending, I will not give it away. But I loved how Omar, being a millennial himself, brought in hip hop and video games and all of that into the context of nature and forest and all. So you could see where perhaps a diaspora kid comes together in this manner. And so both of the books have this element of myths and curses and ghosts and the occult world. Can I know a little more about it? Is it because it does add flavor, it's fun to write about, or is it something that actually feels like there is a subtle world and you want to expose it?
I think because ghosts are an amazing metaphor by how we are haunted by past ideologies, disappeared languages, disappeared landscapes, how we can never truly escape them. So Derrida said that the ghost of Marx haunts Europe, and I would say that the ghost of the British North Borneo Company haunts North Borneo. And then, of course, the unrecognised ghosts of English imperialism in Australia still stalk and haunt the landscape. And I think that's why sometimes Australia is still just a society caught in stasis, because it's unable to confront its ghosts and the violences that were enacted upon Aboriginal people and the dispossession. And so I also wanted to look at gender through the central figure of the Pontianak, which is a very famous type of female vampiric ghost that appears all over Southeast Asia. And a Pontianak has long black hair and a white dress and sort of floats through the trees and smells like perfume. And when she's close, she's always laughing. So when she's close, her laughter is very quiet, but when she's far away, it's loud. So it sort of distorts, time and distance. But the interesting thing that I realized about the Pontianak was that when I was a kid, this was just a story my dad would tell me to scare me. It was exciting, fairly innocuous kind of fable. But then I started to really think deeply about it and read some feminist scholars writing about the Pontianak. And they said two things. Firstly, that the Pontianak's laughter is a form of female resistance. So I sort of bound that in with the character of Crazy Auntie. But at the end of the Pontianak story, I don't know if there's similar myths here, this terrifying vampiric ghost that haunts these men that wronged her, at the end of the story, she is always subdued by a man driving a nail into the back of her neck. And then what happens to the Pontianak? She becomes a docile, submissive, good, domestic Malaysian wife again. And so patriarchy is perpetuated through these stories that you inherit at a really, really young age. And so I wanted to, just as I was doing with Conrad, who also makes an appearance in the book, I forgot to say, I had a lot of fun with that. I wanted to sort of upend this myth that is so pervasive in Malaysian society. I mean, all you have to do is turn on Indonesian Netflix and there's probably like 20 Pontianak movies on there, you know. And so I wanted to use ghosts in a folkloric sense, but also writ large, to look at the colonial history of Borneo.
In Bengali, we call it Petni. So it's exactly the same sort of thing going on.
And we have the lady in the white sari with the loose hair. Yeah, walking backwards. Yeah, with the feet pointing backwards.
That's it.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
Singing songs.
Yes,
Churel.
yeah.
Churel. That's
And
it.
then the idea of the yakshi. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Except the yakshi will never be tamed by a nail to the back of the
Nice.
neck.
Good.
Yeah.
Jeet, ghosts.
Ghosts. Yeah, I mean, you know, for one thing, it's such a useful device, literary device, to bring in a kind of a history and a personality, and to bring in all the shadows, the great shades of the past that inform the present, every moment of the present, you know. And the past is present, you know, as the physicists have been telling us recently. Past, present, future are all one thing. And when you have a ghost who is unaware of time or of the passage of time, and who turns up in the middle of a narrative and says something timeless and endless, it's a way of establishing that time really runs through a novel, and that the past is absolutely part of every event that supposedly happens in the present. I have to confess that there are ghosts in every book I've ever written, so, including the poetry books.
Wow.
I also just want to say, in a really central way, I wanted to use the ghost to talk about something, because we're talking about all these highfalutin kind of concepts and everything, but at the heart of it, it was about a human relationship. And when going back to Malaysia, but I see it sort of in a lot of different places, Indonesia, Philippines, I'm sure here as well. I'd often meet a certain type of person around my age who was Western educated, had a real environmental consciousness, environmentally aware. But if you scratch the surface a little bit, you would oftentimes find out that their parents had been deeply involved in some super corrupt, unscrupulous activities, usually to do with logging or oil palm, you know. And I found it just very interesting that these people would often have quite close, intimate relationships with their parents, but then there was this real element of kind of secrecy and evasiveness about it. And once you scratch the surface, you'd be like, oh my God, that person's father was this guy, you know, like sometimes a real villain. And I found that fascinating because in a small way, we all grapple with these things. Like when somebody dies that we loved and had an intimate, close relationship with, but they were a deeply problematic, if not really fucked up person. How do you grapple with their ghost? But when it's somebody like Yusuf Mansour, who is trying to bend history to his own will and impose himself on not just people, but peoples around him, on land, on the sovereignty of indigenous people, how do you contend with that ghost? And what do you then do with your privilege? We all are, I grew up with a lot of privilege compared to my cousins who all grew up on oil palm plantations. The parents were all labourers. I was the only one that grew up in the West. So that's part of also my imposter syndrome probably, is that privilege that I'm grappling with. What then do we do with our privilege? Do we use it to subvert the status quo or reinforce it? And so that's what these people are grappling with as they grapple with ghosts.
In India, the equivalent of that kind of villainous historical behavior is the East India Company. Right. And you can see the remnants of the East India Company to this day in cities in India. There's a passage in the Elsewerians where this midwife who is addicted to opium, and of course she doesn't know this, but every institution, every hospital, every art gallery, every park in certain cities in India are tainted by the fact that the British East India Company used Indian opium to enslave two generations of Chinese to opium, acquired an enormous fortune from that, and then continued to whitewash that fortune by creating charitable institutions, hospitals, art galleries, grants for writers, all that stuff.
We all have blood in our hands. So the other thing I wanted to talk about were my favorite subject, emotions. So I think, in Omar's book, the emotion, it's very passionate. There are a lot of passionate characters. I mean, they just, Haroon, the boy, he's more, I would say, sort of contained, and his emotions are just below the surface, whereas Roz is all out and nothing is hidden. So writing emotions is kind of a very interesting thing, especially when you have multiple characters with very different personalities, but they're all riding on it. So that's something I wanted to ask Omar. And for Jeet, I'll ask it now so he can think a bit about it. He really surprised me or shocked me at times because the writing, the language or the way the sentences are, they're almost journalistic to a point. They're very chop, 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 and it goes very fast in the first 50 pages where you have Ammu and George get married, this crazy wedding, the food and all of this, and now they're in Bombay and everything has happened. So you're just like reading facts almost in a very beautiful manner, in a very beautifully crafted language, but then the emotions just come out of nowhere and slap you. And you're like, ouch, why am I hurting reading this? So there's a trick to that, and I wish as a writer I knew how to do that, because often I think that's a very, you have to process to a point to present it with such craft and the humor as well. When you can do both together, it's very interesting. So, emotions.
Yeah, I guess with these characters, I was interested in anger again, fury, Southeast Asian fury. And so I was interested in this idea of amok, because that's one of the few words from the Malay language that's made its way into the English language. When you say someone runs amok, it was based on an observance that I believe Captain Cook had back in the day, where he saw that in these seemingly serene societies of the Malay archipelago, someone, a man usually, who was very calm on the surface and had never done anything violent in his life, would suddenly run amok and grab a machete and go and just start swinging at people, cutting people's heads off, slashing at people. And it was seen as this sort of a necessary valve, perhaps, that helped sort of balance society when emotions were so suppressed. And so I was interested in that. Because oftentimes the myth was that this was sort of hand in hand with some type of uncivilized nature, but it could also be not that it's just a personally repressed emotion, but colonially repressed societies as well, and that it's not just indiscriminate. So, for example, under the Dutch East Indies Company, there were examples of people running amok against colonizers. So that's not just indiscriminate. That's actually having a direction, and so I wanted to talk about that. But then obviously the counterbalancing point is that suppression of emotion. And I have to say, moving back to Malaysia, that was one thing that made me realize how westernized I am in a lot of ways. Was my cousins and Malay people, I'd find them quite frustrating sometimes because it was always very diplomatic and often things were left unsaid and you wouldn't directly sort of tell someone how you felt exactly. And so how are they, and that was what they're grappling with, how are they grappling with these ghosts when they often can't verbalize it and it only sort of explodes out of them at certain points?
Jeet?
Interesting about the etymology of the word amok. I wonder how in Cambodia, in Cambodia, there's the kind of national dish is something called fish amok. Oh. Yeah, and these are very sedate fishes. They're not going crazy. But yeah, I'd love to know how that was brought into English in Cambodia. I think
Oh no, I've actually got a tattoo on my leg that says I amok, but it also reads as I am okay. So it's the both.
Lovely. Yeah, the thing about emotion in when you're using emotion or trying to describe emotion, it's a very fine line, and you don't want to tip over into sentimentality or a kind of easy way of pushing your own buttons or the reader's buttons in terms of building up a certain kind of emotion. And I found one way of doing it, at least in this book, was I'd written a lot of it in the first person, and then I changed it to third person, and that kind of puts a distance between the narrator and the story being told, and I found that really useful in terms of just kind of dialing down certain emotions, and you never want to be accused of sentimentality.
Yes. And my apologies, I completely didn't look this way, and we are ready for questions. So I'm going to open the floor, and please make it a question and as precise as possible. We have volunteers with microphones, so if you could just raise your hand. I see one right in the back row right there, please. And the next one will be right there, the white T-shirt, yes.
So, hello. So, this question is to Jeet. I'd like to know, why did you select this semi-documented style of writing? Is it to retain the curiosity within your family, or is it otherwise?
Retain the curiosity within my family, meaning from my family to me, or?
Yeah, I mean, the interest lies within the family to know more.
The thing is, especially as an Indian writer, one of the first things you have to do, especially if you're writing fiction, is to get over the idea of what will your aunties and uncles think. It's the most difficult, almost impossible task in front of an Indian writer, because we are so concerned with what our aunties and uncles might think about the sentences we write. And it works like a kind of self-censorship. So the number one thing you have to do if you want to write seriously about family, about history, is to really not care too much about, Auntie Meena or Uncle Ashok, and stay true to the story. And if that means, of course, I know that what might well happen is there will be some irate voices in the extended family, but so far I haven't heard any of those. And if they do happen, I think we can work it out.
Sorry, there's one more in the back. Yes, please.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Very, very illuminating session. My question is around why you chose to blend fiction with your family stories, right? In the sense that I have recently tried to understand my family and my roots better. And I think what I've really struggled with every time I've tried to write is the incompleteness of it, in the sense that I can never truly accurately represent what my grandparents are telling me or what my parents are telling me, and there are things that they are not telling me because they have buried it under years of trauma and not processing it, right? So me trying to capture that is just so much of a retelling that it just kills the authenticity of it. So is that something you faced, and do you think that it's easier to capture voice than to capture stories? And does blending the non-fiction and fiction sort of serve as a solution to that, in the sense that you're not claiming to be authentic in the retelling of it? Have you ever grappled with these questions, and how do you think about them?
Yeah, of course, authenticity is the point of calling a novel a documentary novel. So when you call it documentary fiction and you're using actual photographs of living people and places, I think it brings in that element of authenticity. And like for example, I'll just mention one thing. There's a sequence in this book where the mother character is doing Sudoku, you know, the puzzle. So I've seen my mother do this a lot, and like towards the end, she was kind of obsessed with Sudoku. And so, just for a paragraph really, I tried to put myself into the head of somebody who takes Sudoku very seriously. And I did some research about Sudoku. I did it myself. I understood the lure of it. It can be addictive. It's once you kind of crack it, I completely get why people do it so much. And I found it incredibly useful for me, illuminating for me to have inhabited her emotions or her mind for just a moment, you know. It's just one thing.
Thank you. So we have the gentleman right there in white.
Thank you. Thanks for this session. It was really great. So my question is that when often at times in such stories, the characters come alive from the real close ones around us. And when we are defining that character, like, would you get afraid from, taking that character to the dark side because you don't want to bring that image of this real person in your own mind? It's not about the opinion of that person, that how would they think. It's just that I want to take this character on a dark side, but I don't want to keep that image of this real person in my mind.
I think that's for you. Yeah, I think it's for you. Oh, it's for me? Actually, in a weird way, because I veer towards the darkness, mostly. So it's more about trying to bring light to the shade for me. Because I think that's what makes it a more complex and, if to use that word, authentic character. Because it would be very easy to paint the oil palm magnate in Borneo as just an evil villain. But actually, what I was interested in these dynamics that I observed was when people were on a person-to-person basis, quite a good, loving father and a responsible member of their immediate community, but then were doing terrible things on a large scale. And so actually it was more about not painting in such broad stereotypical strokes about these characters who do bad things. It was about adding light and complexity. And I hoped that that would then make the reader reflect upon themselves and their own behavior, their own complicities. And so that's sort of how I approached it. In terms of like dealing with real people, yeah, that is scary, because you don't want to get sued. Some of these politicians in Malaysia and stuff are very famously litigious, and so sometimes that's when it's good to be able to use some magic realism or a ghost story and say, hey, look, it's a ghost story. I don't know what you're talking about.
And one last question from the gentleman all the way in the back there.
Hi, my question is for Omar, and maybe Jeet can also take over. This is not related to this discussion, but the book that you're writing will not be read mostly by the people whom you're writing about. And I see a lot of this in Indian authors. They write for, I get the feeling, they write for American audience or European audience. So when you were writing this book, who is your audience? I understand there is economics behind it. You have to pay bills, etc.
That's a great, really wonderful question, and I appreciate it. Because this is something that I really contend with. Firstly, I try not to think about an audience in that way. I try to think about it in a refracted way, that I try to write the type of book that I would like to read, but I do not see out there at the moment. And so in a way I can have my cake and eat it, because I'm a reader, and so surely there are like-minded readers like me. Because otherwise it's too easy, if you're starting to think too broadly about a readership, to create anodyne fence-sitter art that's being pulled in too many directions. But what you say is right. I wanted to write a book that would hopefully open the door, because I knew it was getting a large-scale readership, to other Sabahan writers and Sarawakian writers from North Borneo, so that they could come through. Because Sabah is not really a big reading culture. And so I just wanted to create something that would open the door a little bit, but then also hopefully be translated into Malay, so that people can read it on a broader scale. However, there are dangers inherent in that at the moment. There are large-scale book bannings and censorships, and you can put yourself in extreme danger as soon as a book like this is translated into the Malay language. Suddenly a lot of right-wing ideologues will come after your head. So it's a tricky thing, because I'm existing in the interstitial ground between trying to have a broad readership of people who are the types of people within the book, but then also know that I'm putting myself in danger by doing that. So it's quite a tricky balance. But I do hope that it creates a sort of precedent so that other people can come after me in Sabah.
Thank you so much.
I'll
Jeet,
just
please
quickly
start. Yes.
say that my audience, or certainly the audience that this book is aimed at, is an Indian reader of English. And that, as we know, is a tiny sliver of this country. It's as marginal can be. But I'm quite happy being a marginal writer. There's a reason this book hasn't been published in the UK, and I don't expect it to be. It's an Indian book, it's for Indian readers, and I'm happy with that. There's a reason why those of us who do this aren't exactly rich, but no complaints.
We can all vouch for it on stage. Thank you so much for this honest, candid, and beautiful discussion. Thank you for being here. It was an absolute pleasure, Omar and Jeet. Thank you.